Well, welcome to another episode of All Out in the Open with Michael Soto and myself, Liz Macdonald. We are so glad to be here today with Dr. Lisa Diamond, who is a professor of psychology and gender studies at University of Utah. She has taught almost 25 years in that area after getting her PhD at Cornell. And we also have with us Julia Decker and Jay Christensen, who are two of her research assistants who are working on their masters. I'm going to let you tell us exactly what you're each doing. But for getting started, we would just love to hear from each of you a little bit about your background and why you're here and what you're doing.
Yeah, of course. In the spirit of storytelling, it probably helps to start with mine because I graduated with my bachelor's in 2020. Oh, time is a soup. 2022. Apologies. I graduated in the at the tail end of COVID.
Okay.
So recollection is a wild thing. But I did my undergraduate thesis with Lisa Diamond, looking at the intersection of traumatic symptomology and LGBTQ plus identity within the LDS Church. But using social safety as that sort of connecting through line of like, okay, so we know that minority stress theory may or may has some pretty inconsistent results as far as seeing the connection to outcomes. So we had that changes the whole course of our lab work, and now we get into Julia's work, which ended up building on everything and sort of launching what we are calling the Lighthouse cohort now.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was also an undergraduate honors student looking for things to do for my thesis, and I was really interested in obsessive compulsive symptomology, stuff related to obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, and when I found out that Lisa and Jay were doing work on social safety and scrupulosity in former and current members of the LDS Church who were LGBTQ, I was like, I have to be a part of this project. This is the coolest thing ever. So that's when I joined the project. And for my honors thesis, we sent out another big survey to a bunch of folks. And we did have some struggles with that. It was kind of around the same time that like Chat GPT became big. And so we got like some bot responses, and that was fun to sort through. And as we kind of were looking at the data from Jay's thesis and from my thesis and all the stuff that we've done so far with social safety, we realized like we keep needing to hear the stories from like the same groups of people. Like we might want to hear from parents this time, and might want to hear from their kids this time, and we might want to hear from people who aren't members of the church here and people who are members of the church here. And with the new technology of like the bots and AI, we were like, we really want to have a place that we know is really secure, that we can provide a platform for people to share their stories, and we also want to see what happens over time. And so that's kind of where the Lighthouse cohort was born. We want to have a space that not only looks at the mental health outcomes and stories and life trajectories of LGBTQ folks, but also their family members and those relationships and how those relationships change over time.
Wow.
Wonderful. And I'm just going to put in a little plug that Julia and her family are, her parents and her sister are good friends with our family. And I got to know Julia from this whole situation. And I'm just so grateful. So she's a Mesa girl, bringing it back to our Arizona roots. So anyway,
Oh,
glad to
amazing.
have you here, Julia. And Jay and Lisa, please tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been a developmental health psychologist for my whole career, and I have been, and I've, for me, the whole thing about developmental psychology is not a particular age group. It's about change over time. And so my initial, like the first study I ever did was a longitudinal study of sexual identity development that showed that it doesn't finish right after you come out. It keeps going, and questioning keeps going, and often gender becomes a question. And so I think we often get this sense that development, you like reach a stage and you're finished and you move on. And everything that we've sort of learned as a lab is that every moment of time is just one moment of time. And we found that people, and especially with regard to religious and spiritual identity, people who were LGBTQ would leave the church, come back to the church, to a sort of middle ground, and that their relationship with the church was almost like a marriage over time. It was never the same. It would go in and out of periods of intensity. And even when it was over, it wasn't over in the same way that anyone who's ended a long term relationship, it still lives in you. And so part of what we realize that we don't have, and the information that we need to be able to give to families, is some idea of what that journey looks like, and to sort of remove any self-consciousness or sort of shame in anyone about, like, oh, is my family doing this right? And like, should I be in the church? Should I be out of the church? Can I be out of the church if my sister's in it? Like all those things that every family goes through, to normalize it, to sort of normalize it and say, you are not alone. This isn't one decision. It's a whole series of decisions. And that what we're trying to do is just capture that process of change as it unfolds, to kind of give the next generation some sense of just how many different ways there are to manage these relationships in a family that has different degrees of connection to the faith. And that's really complicated. And so what we really hope to do is to just normalize the variation, that there's a million ways to do it right. There's a million ways to do it wrong. The only way to know is to follow people over time.
Wow.
That's so interesting. I can't wait to hear more about this. I will say that when our son came out in 2016, my husband and I started reading your stuff, and we have just been so grateful for what you've done in the past. And the more I hear about what you're doing currently now, it just is so helpful. It some of it seems like, oh, this is really, this is how it should be, or I understand that this is how people's experiences are, but it's so lovely to have research and data behind it to kind of explain it and to help people to learn things that we can do better and things that we should be aware of, and all of those things because of the research and the numbers that you are crunching behind the scenes as you study.
Has a huge impact on our community. It seems like the idea of social safety is really core to what you study, and this idea of helping, the motivation behind it, helping families of all kinds understand that there's no one right way to be. Can you all tell us a little bit more about what social safety is, and what you're learning about that sort of throughout this whole process?
So it was really cool for me to hear about social safety for the first time in the first class of Lisa's that I took. And we have always thought of stress as something that you feel like in the presence of a stressor, right? Like you're normally feeling calm and regulated, and then something stressful happens. And for a LGBTQ person, this could be like someone makes a comment about people who are queer, or you're worried about like a microaggression, and we think of it as like, oh, that thing happens, and then you start to experience stress, and there's a stress response, and your body goes through that whole stress response. But social safety essentially argues that it's not just like those experiences of stress that cause that stress response. It's a consistent hypervigilance. So if you have experiences that have been stressful in the past, it's kind of like your foot isn't usually on the brake of the car, it's usually on the ignition. And so social safety is to take your foot off of the gas and put it on the brake pedal. Which means that like being neutral in a space, going around and existing as a queer person and being in a new space and saying, okay, if I'm not sure if I'm safe here, I'm going to err on the side of caution and assume that I'm unsafe, and kind of take on this sense of hypervigilance and be checking all the time. Like, how is everyone around here perceiving me? Am I safe in this space? Am I accepted in this space? Am I going to be rejected here? Whereas safety, once it's been actually communicated and it's been explicit and you know for sure that you are safe in a space, that's not something that you're thinking about anymore. Safety doesn't really feel like anything specific because it's just that's kind of your more neutral space.
And none of these things are conscious. We're not often thinking, what is this? It's an automatic. Our brains are always checking, always checking. We don't control it, and so
Yeah,
a
it'll
lot of
take
us.
energy from us regardless of whether or not we realize we're doing the monitoring, which is why it's so exhausting for a lot of individuals to just walk around and do their day to day.
Yeah.
Often, when I describe hypervigilance to people, they'll then be like, "Oh, is that what that is? Is that what that is?" Because once you tap into it, you're like, "Oh yeah, I'm like," "Err." But for a lot of LGBTQ folks, that becomes such a baseline that they don't even notice it, and
Yeah.
so they may think, "Why am I? Why am I not well? Like nothing bad enough has happened." And I often find that for LGBTQ folks, they'll often be like, "Well, no one has victimized me. Like, so why do I not feel good? No one's hurt me. No one's threatened me." And it's because we think, oh, the threat must be the reason for the mental health issues. The mental health issues come as much from the ever present wondering, watching, waiting. You, it saps your attention. It robs your life of joy, but you may not even realize that you're doing it. That the toll of stress preparation is as taxing to the body as the stressor itself, and that just flips a lot of our intervention approaches on their head because it means that simply removing discrimination, removing stressors will never be enough.
Yeah, taking us back to the minority stress theory, which would posit that the sources of like stress and the reasons why there are mental health disparities and physical health disparities among LGBTQ plus people is because of the presence of those discrete identifiable stressors, of those events that people can remember and actually like articulate to another individual. Whereas it's a lot
Check off on
more
a list.
yes. Whereas it's a much more difficult to say like I walk around my day and I don't experience any of these stressors and yet I'm still exhausted and yet I'm still feeling depressed, anxious, etc., etc.
For our listeners, can you give us a couple of examples of what you mean by that? Because some people might not even know exactly what we're, talking about. They might know about an overt, someone calling you a bad name or, throwing something or whatever. Those are things that might come to mind. But can you tell us some of a couple of situations where that hypervigilance might be
Yes,
existing?
absolutely. And actually, this is gonna play into what I was gonna bring up because social safety is like a universal. Everybody experiences that. Where it becomes a sort of a unique role in the lives of LGBTQ plus people is in the greater presence of ambiguity of these what is usually sort of coined as like these neutral responses, neither positive nor negative where that framing gets off, like, becomes a little twisted.
Where some people are totally fine with gay folks
Yes.
and some people are not. And people are like, "Oh, it's so accepting now." And it's like, it's sometimes, and sometimes is not what the brain wants to hear because then the brain has to say, "Well, who?
Yeah.
Well, which?"
And so suddenly you're having to put in the effort of figuring out, okay, I'm getting this ambiguous cue. I have this uncle who isn't overtly like being homophobic or transphobic towards me, but he's also not asking about like my love life. He's not asking about my dating relationships like he's doing with the rest of my siblings. Sort of, especially within like the comparative context of like how other people are being treated versus you. So that's a neutral response, right? You would say, okay, like I'm not being told that I shouldn't be dating
Like, nothing
X,
bad
Y,
happened.
yeah.
Right.
But because your brain has the opportunity to read into it, we tend to err on the side of caution, on the side like evolutionarily, it is more beneficial for us to assume the worst so that we can protect ourselves.
Right.
Right.
That's what we do.
And the brain is literally wired to wait for a cue of unambiguous safety in the eyes and
Right.
face and voice of another person before letting that hypervigilance let down. Like it is our default state. And so the absence of clear, unambiguous signals of connection, like, hey, Jay, so are you dating? Like, that's a tiny sentence, right? It might take 3 seconds to say that, but it would signal, okay. And so these tiny moments are actually turning on and turning off a whole system of stress preparation in the brain. And it's out of proportion, right? It takes so little to demonstrate, safety. One example that just moves me deeply. There was a parent that I talked to, a parent of a trans kid, who had written a letter to people in the ward about their daughter coming out as trans and really didn't know how it was going to be treated. And during their first interaction with the bishop said, how are your sons and how are your daughters? And he used the plural of daughters because prior to the transition, he only had one daughter.
Yeah.
That one thing, she said she could feel the flood of relief in her body. One syllable, one S
Wow.
was a signal of safety. And so it really is not that difficult for us to kind of take this knowledge and look at our day-to-day life and say, how can I make it absolutely clear to the people around me that I am a safe person for them? What can I say to remove any uncertainty? I'm not going to assume that they can read my mind and they know that I'm okay. I
Yep.
need to show it. I need to say it. I need to demonstrate it. Those are easy things for a lot of people to do if they just devote a little time to it.
I do
Wow.
since working on this whole concept, I have started to think of like social safety signals as a gift that I give to the other people in my life. Like that is something that I now kind of think about on a regular basis and say like, oh, you seem like uncertain right now. Like now is a good time for me to communicate like that. Like it's okay to be messy right now. It's okay to not know what's going on. It's okay to be upset. I'm still here. And I just like think of that reassurance as a gift to the people in my life. And also like when people give it to me, I think of that as a gift also. So that's something that I've been able to kind of think about. Social safety to me, I always think of like in high school, my two best friends and I would just like sit in one of our cars parked in front of our parents' house for hours and just like talk about things till like really late at night. And like just that feeling of very calm, like I can say whatever I want here and we're all gonna take turns listening to each other and we all feel safe here and then we're all gonna go home and go to bed and it'll be a great night. Like that's what I think of social safety for me.
Love that. Love that.
Wow.
So you've been doing these studies, and for people who don't feel included, accepted, affirmed, and protected. So what are some of the solutions that you have found? You've given a few of them, like just letting someone know that, hey, I'm acknowledging that your child's gender is different. That and everybody's comfort level is different. Like we fly a pride flag in front of our home in June, and I can't tell you how many people have come up and said things about feeling safe or grateful their child felt happy to have seen that. But for some people, that's a big step. And so, what are some other things and ways that we can help people feel that we are a safe place?
Yes. As sort of this is sort of where the conversation gets messy, right? Because it always comes down to like the family context. When we're speaking
Every
about families,
family
it's
is different.
different.
Right.
Because exactly like you mentioned, you'll have some families who are in like a safe enough area that they can fly a pride flag, and that can be meaningful. For other families, they can't, and so they have to show in other ways. There's also sort of the reverse where flying the pride flag, they may do it, and it may not be as deep a meaning because it's sort of a given.
And even pride flags, like now,
Yeah.
every pride they, liquor companies put them on vodka balls. I'm
Yep.
like, I'm not sure that
Yeah.
was really
Yeah.
the point.
When you start to get like corporate into it, like where there's money involved,
Sure.
then the meaning also gets very, very muddled.
It's just like there's
Sure.
no one
Yeah.
right thing.
Yeah.
And a parent that's like, I don't want to fly a pride flag, they may be like, does that mean I'm not doing the right thing? There's so
Right.
many ways to do it right. There's so many ways to not do it right. There's a million ways, and
Mhm.
every family is going to be different. One of the things that I recommend that people do is actually ask. It can be hard for folks to ask, what do I like? When are the times that with me you feel totally supported? What are the things I do or say? Tell me about a time that I gave you exactly what you needed. Because a lot of times you will be surprised at what the other person says. We make all these assumptions that the way we give support and show safety is how the other person feels it. It's a
Right.
mistaken assumption. We do what feels right for us. We may be wrong. And so, one thing is for families to get used to talking more openly about when do you feel my love? And it may not be a pride flag. It may be, well, mom, when you ask me about who I have a crush on, that's when I feel your love. It may be different for every relationship in the family. What makes a sibling feel safe may be different. And so a part of it is for the family to get used to not making assumptions and for prioritizing not just how they show safety, but prioritizing whether the person they're showing it to feels it. Because if they don't feel it, it doesn't matter.
I
Wow.
love that. Gosh, in relationships,
Yeah.
I think we assume that, oh, I should know how my partner is going to react to this or feel about this, or I should know how my child, as a mother, I think a lot of us think, oh, I should know, or I do know. And I think that's such a great point for all of us in any kind of relationship is to open up the lines of communication and ask people, okay, how can I help you to feel not only safe, but loved, seen, all of those things. I love that.
I feel like there's also a lesson there for institutions and organizations, right? Like, because that's a different kind of relationship. But I'm just thinking of all of the stories that I hear from families of LGBTQ people, from LGBTQ people about their experiences with churches, right? With the LDS Church, with other churches, and their needs not being met, right, in those spaces because they don't feel safe, right? They're not receiving those signals, those words, all of those things that tell them your family is welcome here. And I think in the LDS Church, that's a huge experience for LGBTQ people in our families. Are you seeing that shift at all? Or are you like, how is your research looking at that and understanding that today, especially after this new round of policy changes this summer?
There's that phrase, ecclesiastical roulette, that some bishops will create an environment in their ward that is safe and affirming, like the one I described, who
Right.
just immediately found a way to connect with that parent, just
Yeah.
connecting with them at a human level before anything else. And other folks don't. And so now that we know that ambiguity and uncertainty is a recipe for hypervigilance, we can see how the fact that some folks are having a really positive experience makes it more confusing sometimes for the folks who are not.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That makes a lot of sense. Wow. Ooh, my
So it's like
gosh.
there's progress, and yet it's like, well, it's like, do I have like, is that going to happen? Is that not going to happen? And when you're kind of showing up at church, not knowing what's going to happen,
Yeah.
that can be terrifying.
Absolutely. That's probably the most terrifying thing, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Playing
Wow.
into ecclesiastical roulette, you also there's sort of differing approaches in terms of like what is the kindest thing for a bishop to do? Because you have that question of when you're looking through the eternal perspective, and there's the belief that if you're acting on like a non-heterosexuality, non-cisgenderism, that you will not end up with your family in the eternal life. That in my initial thesis, that was the one message that predicted the greatest rates of like PTSD symptomology, greater depression, greater scrupulosity, which I don't know if we defined earlier, is a religious specific version of OCD. So like
Compulsive.
compulsively reading your scriptures, wow, language is leaving me. Confessing your sins to the bishop, stuff like that. But so when you're taking that eternal perspective, like, yeah, it is more important to save your child and make sure that they get to stay with you in the eternal life, because in comparison, we're only on this earth for 100 years or so, give or take.
And so, from the parent might think that just focusing on getting the kid back on the gospel path is the way to protect their social safety.
Yeah.
And that might be what makes them feel safe.
Uh-huh.
But there might be a huge mismatch between its effect on the kid, because the human brain is designed to fear abandonment more than anything else. We're a social species. There is nothing more frightening than disconnection. It lies at the heart of all humans' deepest fears. And so to put that out there, like, well, you can, follow the gospel path, or you will be left bereft, alone, and abandoned, is sort of going to the core of a human fear. It's an existential fear, and it seizes the whole mind and body.
So where
Absolutely.
we're beginning to see the research go is that if you do take that approach, though, of preferencing keeping your child or your family member or whoever it may be within the church and keeping to the iron rod, etc., then that is more likely to simply push them away. And so even in cases where they may return to the church, you've soured the relationship, right? You've burned that bridge, which is also sort of a primary component. Like, families are sacred, and they're integral to the religion and to your beliefs.
Right.
So if you are pushing your child away, then you're trying to keep them in, but sacrificing
The
bond, which tends to do more harm over the long run.
And there's also so much scripture that talks about the importance of these bonds. And so one of the things that we've tried to emphasize, especially for faithful people, is that you are always following God's will if you are prioritizing your connection to that child or that family member. You cannot go wrong when you say that this tie between us, our trust and our safety with one another, is at the core of everything. It's the precondition for any spiritual guidance, is the existence of the bond. And so that if parents can sort of press pause in their head, like, there's plenty of time for instruction later, but while the bond is in danger, you connect first. You put all your effort in that. That is what God wants. There's no part of any doctrine that says sacrifice the bond. Like, that is just not consistent with anything. And sort of give people permission to say, for right now, all of your decisions about the church and what the kid does, all of that can wait until the safety has been reestablished. It's the first principle: safety first, connection first. And that's consistent with so many church teachings that we feel like that's one way to sort of calm everybody down. It's like, there is time. This is going to be a long road. Whatever is happening when the kid is coming out, this is the beginning of a long series of conversations. None of them will go well if you sacrifice your connection. You have to start there.
I am in this space all the time working with parents, and this is a consistent and kids keep coming out every day, and every day parents are like, they attempt to join a private Facebook group I'm a moderator of called I'll Walk With You, which is a wonderful resource for people on this path. but almost to a one, they're like, hey, I'm an participating member and I believe in the gospel and I love my child. What do I do? And that's the question every single time. And every single time, my answer is very similar to what Lisa was just saying is, hey, if you can prioritize that relationship, this is what I believe the Savior is teaching us, is modeling that, relationship, that love, that, me and you, this is what is important. And like you said, the rest, but we are, that ambiguity and that lack of certainty is so difficult for people who are trying to make this all, I need an answer for this. This isn't in my rule book. Like, how am I going to make this happen? And man, if we can just focus on that one-on-one and that family relationship, but it's so hard.
So there's the parable about the shepherd going after the one lost sheep instead of the 99. The shepherd does not stop and say, how did you get lost?
Right.
Did you cause this? Did you do this? Why did this happen? How can we prevent it? No. There's a time and place for that, but it's not while the sheep is lost. The priority is to bring that sheep back into the loving protection. There is time for everything else. I sometimes think impatience is a huge impediment here. That if everyone could just slow down and say, yes, I have a million questions. Luckily, none of them will be answered anytime soon. But what can you focus your attention on? Connection, connection, connection. It will make every conversation after that easier. So be like the shepherd. Don't waste time thinking, why? Did you get so far away? I thought I had a pretty good fence. That's a waste of time. First priority is to enfold and protect.
And to that point, there's a question of like, how do you build that culture of safety in your own home and in your own family so that when things come up, it can be, there's that level of trust there to deal with it safely. And I think, first of all, like, it doesn't just apply to LGBTQ kids, like this stuff can't necessarily start like when your kid comes out. I mean, any time is a good time to start if you haven't been, but that culture of like, oh yes, you've been in trouble before, like maybe you did something and you made a mistake, but we're going to be accepting and forgiving and we're bringing you back into the flock. Like that principle of forgiveness is really important across every member of the family. Like every member.
You can be mad and disappointed and still be like, I'm mad at you. I hate that you did this. You cannot lose me. I'm still right here. I can be mad at you and absolutely locked arms with you. And parents think their kids know that, and kids often don't. It has to be said.
Yeah. Yes.
Julia, you were
That's so
saying that there are
powerful.
things that you now do to offer safety to people in your life. Can you give examples of like, because like everybody comes up with different ways to do it. And I think they're all kind of creative and beautiful.
Yeah, sure. One thing is, I feel like sometimes like my friends and I will be worried about asking for like favors or help. So it'll be like, oh, like I am more than happy to take you to the airport. I am more than happy to like help you go pick up your car somewhere. Like it's okay. I know you would do the same for me. Like, and I know that you
Like you might be uncertain about whether to ask me. I want to remove that.
exactly. So
I
like
love that.
I've definitely like had conversations where it's like, oh no, like I feel so bad, like you shouldn't have to do this, and it's like, no, like at some point I will need you, and this is just something like I want to establish that we do this for each other. If you need my help, you're going to call me. If I need your help, I'm going to call you, and that's just how this relationship is going to work. As well as like if I need to bring up an issue or an argument to be like, I love you, I care about you, I really value our relationship, and that is why I really want to talk to you about this. Like, I want to work through this with you. And also having it be more about like the problem and the situation rather than like, you did something that I don't like, or I did something that you don't like. Having that idea of like, there is an issue here and like, it's not working out for any of us. So let's kind of get together and problem solve and tackle this issue together. You're not the problem. I'm not the problem. The situation is the problem. And if we work on it together, then we can try to figure it out.
I think, and we were talking about how that can be helpful for parents too, because they often think, well, what does this mean? I can't have rules. I can't have discipline. And we're like, no, no, no. You absolutely can. It's about the way you enforce the rules. The differences between saying, I can't believe you talked about being gay at the thing that embarrassed the whole family. Whereas another way would be like, you know what? I felt uncomfortable. It wasn't working. That just that didn't go great. Can we talk about how we want to do that differently? There's a way to sort of enforce rules and standards that don't put blame, that don't say you're the problem or I'm the problem. And I often encourage families to get used to the phrase, this isn't working for me. Because when you say this isn't working for me, it makes no assumptions about why. And like
Right.
often we don't know why something isn't working.
Yeah.
But to sort of stop pretending that we have all the answers. I think another thing that parents can do is to admit to their own confusion, to be able to say to their kid, listen, I don't even know if I'm doing the right thing. I'm not actually sure what to do. All I know is we need to talk about this because it's confusing. I don't have the answers to this. And that little bit of vulnerability can build a lot of trust
Big
with a
skill.
kid. That it's not like I'm coming down and I know the way. Because most parents have no idea how to raise a gay kid. So to just say, listen, I don't know. Like nothing I've learned has prepared me for this. So be
No.
patient, with me. And I often encourage kids to be a little more patient with their parents. And I often say, you may have been struggling with your sexuality for years, and you've reached a place where you want to talk to your parents about it. And they're at the place that you were at day one. They, they know nothing. And so buckle up. It's going to be a long ride. And if you want other people in the family to extend patience and a little bit of grace to you, you have to do it for the other person, which means everybody's also got to get comfortable with making some mistakes and learning how to apologize and how to forgive. I know a lot of parents of trans kids who are just so nervous about messing up the
Saying the wrong
pronouns
thing.
and the names because they feel that if they make one mistake, their kid will never forgive them.
Right.
And to be able to is there any family that makes no mistakes?
No.
Nope.
Nope.
And
What
every
about-
time a mistake is made, it's actually an opportunity for everybody to prove to one another they can do this.
Yeah.
That they can
like
bump
that.
and they can mess it up and they can say, can we redo that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about, how we talk about other groups of people in our homes and, whether it's we're watching the news, whether it's after church and we're talking about that family or those people in our ward or at the school or our neighborhood. I think that can be a way that we can signal to our kids, whether they're LGBT or not, that we are a safe place when they have things that they're dealing with, working on, struggling with, that we're not just going to sit there and go, "Oh, those people for whatever reason." And that's hard because we're all human, right? But I think that's a really great skill as parents that we can all work on.
Absolutely.
Tell us about the new data and findings regarding parents and families of LGBTQ plus people and the trauma they experience. I was at a recent gathering called Gather that you presented at, Lisa, and you talked about that. I would love to hear a little bit more about that.
We're used to thinking that all of the pain in this process is located in the kid. And we should be worried about
Absolutely.
kids because mental health has its own developmental component.
Right.
Teens are very vulnerable, even young adults are vulnerable. But in all of the attention that we pay to the kids, we have to remember that everyone in the family is affected by any stressor. And what we found when we measured folks before and after the legislative session is that it was actually the family members of queer and trans folks whose mental health was affected the most during the course of the legislative session. They started out being less depressed and less anxious and more optimistic than their queer and trans family members. But by the end of the session, they had come down. They had joined their queer and trans family members. at a level of distress. And one of the things I find so compelling about that is that, there's a lot more family members of queer and trans folks than queer and trans folks. And if you actually run the stats, if you assume that there's about 12% of Utah's population that's LGBTQ, and that's an undercount, I'll just say. That's true. And if, as we found in our study, the average LGBTQ Utahn has a median of 4 family members living in Utah. It got all the way up to, like, some folks have 300, right? So about half of the state's population has a direct family connection to an LGBTQ person. Half the state's population, which means that anything that hurts the mental health of a queer and trans person is not just affecting them. It is rippling through the entire community. It's part of the fabric of the whole state. We're all connected. And so on one hand, it's like, maybe you don't care about the mental health of queer and trans folks, but look at the toll. Look at the toll. Everything we do to enhance the mental health of families enhances the mental health of gay kids. Everything we do to enhance the mental health of gay kids will also help their families. This is not an isolated problem. This is a system, which means that we can intervene in a million different places. They don't all have to be big. And what we think is helpful is for every family and every person to figure out, okay, with what I'm capable of, with what I'm comfortable of, what can I do? What's one way that I can make myself a safer person? Maybe it's not going to be going to a protest. Maybe it's not going to be X, Y, and Z. Maybe for one family member, it's going to be having the courage to say, I'd love to know more about when you started to question. Like even showing curiosity. So parents don't have to do everything at once. They have to figure out what they can do. Every step forward is a step forward. They can be really small. And different members of the family are doing different things. The sibling can play a different role than the aunt and the uncle. There's a million things they can do. Sometimes being the buffer. Like I found out only after I came out that my sister had been like running interference with my mom and dad. And had been like, you deal with your stuff. Don't you splooge it on her. She shouldn't even know that you're worried about this. I didn't even realize that she had been doing that. She just wanted to protect me from whatever was going on in there. That's no one, like, I don't know how she figured out that that was the right thing to do, but she did. So I think a lot of family members have good instincts. Like, what can I do? Well, maybe this. Try it. Try anything. Any little thing will contribute to the goal.
So
I know,
good.
makes me
Ugh.
creepy. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so beautiful, and like that resonates really deeply with me after this last policy change this summer. I, in no scientifically rigorous way at all, collected a little bit of feedback from people and just asked one question of, what do you think about, this policy change? Maybe 2% of the respondents were trans people. The rest were our families. They were our parents, our grandparents, our siblings, right? People, our friends, right? People that just love us and care about us, and the impact was so intense on the people that love us. For trans people, we were, pretty much every trans person that responded was like, well, this is not great and I don't like it and I'm bummed about it, but I kind of expect people to discriminate against me, and so seems normal. Don't love it, not going to be great, but still, expected it. But for our families, the pain was so palpable, and the sadness, right? Just the grieving. So I don't know. I think that's a really helpful way to think about the impact of discrimination, right? The impact on entire communities that is far more than just LGBTQ people, right? It's our moms, right? It's our friends. It's the people that do life with us.
I wish.
Or a family member to say, this really bothered me too. Like,
Yeah.
I read this, it's driving me crazy. And
Yeah.
because I think a lot of folks will not assume that their family members understand or share or even see their pain.
Yeah.
So even letting someone know, I read this policy and it made me sick.
Yeah.
That for a trans person to be like,
Mhm.
you, like, it made you sick? Like,
Yeah.
Even things like that, the simple disclosure of this hurts me too. It hurts me because I love you so much that any threat to you, I feel it. I feel it in my core.
Yeah.
I wish that I could give a glimpse to people of the parents of trans kids that have reached out or that have shared in this private Facebook group for LDS parents of LGBTQ kids. The pain is just overwhelming.
Yeah.
And the, you know, this has been my safe place. This has been my core of my faith, my people, and just the devastation of, but this is my child and I can't choose not my child. And so it is it does affect. I'm not saying that it's more on me than it is on a trans person. I'm just saying it does affect everyone in the social structure of LGBTQ people.
Yeah. It really does.
A lot of parents feel that their priority is to focus on the mental health of their kids. And they'll be like, mine can wait. My pain, I'll just stuff it away.
Right.
That is not true.
Yeah.
That is not helpful.
Yeah.
That is not helpful because it's almost like that thing where, like, put the mask on yourself on the airplane before putting it on your kid. You will be a more empathic, giving, responsive parent if you give yourself the space and time with trusted people away from your kid to go through all the feelings, to grieve, to rage, to yell, to be annoyed, to be confused, to be like, I don't even get, like, ugh. You are entitled to all of that because you are a human too.
Yeah.
You just have to do it away from the kid, so that they don't catch it.
Absolutely.
But the idea that you can stuff down your mental health, we've seen there is so much trauma in the parents. You will not be a very empathic parent if you're hypervigilant. So find the people that you can unload with and unload. Get it out. Do your crying and your raging and your connection. Then, when you're ready, then you can focus attention on your kid. But this idea of sacrificing yourself doesn't help anybody.
No.
Amen.
It really doesn't. I think
Amen.
that's where groups like Liz's
Yes.
parent group, and many parent groups. I love that actually about about our faith tradition. There are lots of parent groups out there supporting each other so that they can be good parents to LGBTQ kids. I think that's so important.
Absolutely. Yeah. We would love for you to tell us just
I was mentioned lead with love earlier, the acronym, and I want
So this was a project. This was a project done by my colleague Dave Hebner, who was at the university for a while, and he was really trying to figure out, like, what are some first principles that we can give parents who are struggling with this that can be easily, universally applied. And so the acronym LEAD, L is let your affection show. That a lot of, and different families are different. Some of them don't say I love you. Some of them aren't touchy-feely. But almost every family has like an intimate vocabulary, a way that they show affection. Maybe it's just the way they laugh or the things they do. But whatever it is, after a kid comes out, they're going to assume, without even thinking about it, that that's going to be withdrawn. So you do the opposite.
Wow.
You make sure that whatever it is, hey, do you want to go shopping? Hey, do you want to watch that movie? Do you want to play that video game? Whatever it is, do it. Do more of it so that they have no uncertainty about it. The second E is what we just talked about. Express your own pain away from your child.
Right.
Like, you are entitled to it. Go ahead, do it. All of it. A is avoid rejecting behaviors. And that means looking at the way you speak to your family and making sure to take out anything involving shame, anything involving blame, that you can still have rules and standards, but to be really, really careful, knowing that that kid's brain is a rejection-seeking device. It will find it. And so any instruction that you give has to be undertaken without any hint of rejection. And that if you're not sure, you can go back to the kid and be like, I just want to be clear that you weren't like that may have come across in a way. I just want to make sure you know that, that's not what I mean. Rejection is a real enemy, and so you might have to work harder to avoid it than normal. And then the final one, D, is do good before you feel good. In other words, you can be conflicted. You cannot really understand anything. You can be like, I haven't worked this out. I haven't talked to the bishop yet. I'm like, what? You can have all of those things and still say, okay, I'll deal with that tomorrow. But right now, my goal is the bond. I'm going to do what I know is right for my sacred tie to this child. Everything else I can get to. But even when I'm not sure, like if I believe this or I agree with this, you can still do the right thing. You can just do it. And, and there was actually a conference talk last weekend. I think it was Elder Suarez who was talking about how authenticity isn't always, the greatest possible thing. And I was like, wow, that's actually a really helpful message for parents. Like, yeah, your authentic self might be saying, I don't believe in non-binary. I don't think this is the gospel path. I don't agree with any of this. Yeah, you can think all that. Maybe expressing all your authentic judgment of your child is not the right thing in that moment. That sometimes what God wants you to do is to choose which parts of your authentic self to share. And in that moment, if sharing your authentic self is going to disconnect you from your child, that is not what God wants. God never wants that.
That is an application that I didn't immediately grasp. So
Same.
I really appreciate you sharing that, Lisa. Thank you.
That's a very helpful reframing.
I really do.
I'm not sure it's what Elder Suarez wanted or intended,
Not-
but, it's
like it.
true. None of us are fully authentic all the time.
No.
Fair. Yeah. Very
We
true.
hold things back, and we hold things back to preserve connection.
True.
Great
Wow.
point.
That
Great
was
point.
really good.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of therapists would say unfiltered self-expression is cruel. It's cruel in a family. No one gets to take all the filters off. It's just cruel.
Most little kids do.
Yes,
But
that's
they
true.
have a lot of temptations.
And also the things that they say, things that kids say aren't nearly as cutting. They're not like, your marriage sucks.
That's the exception that proves the rule, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
So as we kind of are wrapping up, this has been such a great conversation, and I think can be so helpful to listeners of all different walks. How can someone who's been listening, who wants to take action in this space, do things that are scalable? Because we want to make sure that, everybody who's listening is like, well, I'm not a PhD researcher at University of Utah, which is fabulous, and we need it, and we're so grateful for it. But if they're not, how can someone in their home, in their neighborhood, in their faith community, or any sphere which they function in, how can they put these things into practice per what you have learned and your experiences?
Solve it all.
I'll solve it all right now. Okay. The first thing that comes to mind is just make those safety signals as explicit as possible. And also give yourself permission to do those things. I think it's surprising how giving yourself permission to be messy and be openly messy in front of others also gives them permission to do that in front of you. You are making yourself a safe person in a safe space through also showing yourself compassion and openly doing that. I also think non-religious forms of social safety, forms of safety outside of the church, have in the research so far shown to be really helpful for mental health. Not, or at least it seems to be related to that.
And so if your ward is not the greatest place, it's okay. There's other ways to get what you need.
Yeah.
Even a single source was shown to buffer some of the effects of depression, anxiety, scrupulosity.
One person.
Yeah.
One person. That blows my mind. Everyone listening can totally change the life of another person in your life. Today. Today. It
We
doesn't
can all do
require
that.
intervention. You can all do it by just doing exactly what Julia was talking about, making these intentional choices. How am I going to show up?
And as per the non-religious social safety and having that one person and having those people that show up, like, I think sometimes parents might be worried, like, oh, I don't necessarily want my kid in like a super queer space that isn't related to the church, because they might be worried about their kid like hearing different things or like not being as accepted in those spaces or any like variety of concerns. But having spaces that are affirming to that part of your identity and where there isn't that necessarily that conflict between like the religious values and the sexuality or gender identity, it's like regulating emotionally. It's like I am in a space with people like me, and so to physically be in a space with a lot of other people like you is an underrated thing. So you might be worried about like, oh, I don't know if I like my kid can handle that or if I can handle my kid being in that space, but there is a really strong, beautiful community in queer spaces, and that is, I think, one of the most beautiful parts of being an LGBTQ person is you have a history, you have LGBTQ ancestors, and there's stories there. And so being able to go into those spaces, like there is a different form of social safety there that you can't necessarily get in a religious space or a family space. Like these are all different kinds of safety and they all feel differently physically when you're in them and when you're around these people. And having that variety is important. And so it's okay to kind of branch out and be like, maybe I'm not getting everything I need from these spaces that, you know, are kind of in my comfort zone and feel really easy to me now that I've been here for a while. Like branch out because there's a lot of different types of safety in a lot of different really beautiful ways.
And I think that's something a lot of parents struggle with anyway. It's like they're used to being like, "Oh, I am the source of all the good things." And I think as all kids get older, parents realize, "Oh my God, I am no longer the be all and end all," and that's a bit of a loss. And if the place that makes your kid feel safe is like a bunch of LGBTQ friends, a parent might be like, "That like, what are they going to be teaching my kid? What are they going to be like? What is my kid going to be learning?" And the important thing to remember is like they're not going to be learning, they're going to be feeling. You want your kid to feel a certain way. And feeling safe with their friends is like a critical part of life. And so for parents to just sort of ease up, like stop thinking about what they're learning or watching, think about how they want their child to feel. And it's that feeling of the letdown of the vigilance, of the feeling the sense of connection. That's, you know, the goal of it. So parents need to remember that part of what they're trying to do is to give their kids some options for where to get safety and to not feel that all of it has to come from them in the home. You know, the home is great, but it's not the only place that we draw kind of support and sustenance from.
And you have the common misconception. Sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I have to feel like that must extend to parents as well, right? Like there are spaces for parents of LGBTQ kids that are different than any other space where parents can find safety too, right? And community and love and support in a way that as queer people, when we are in queer spaces, we feel that, right? Like that might not be always a
May
church space.
struggle if they don't feel like I know that some parents are like, oh, I went to PFLAG and I didn't like it. I felt pressured.
Right.
And, like there's so many different ones, and
Yes.
it's okay for a parent to not like one of them and to say maybe the mom likes this space and the dad's like that doesn't work to me. That's okay.
Totally.
That's
Yeah.
all right. You know, your
Yeah.
goal is to find the place where you feel that letdown. Maybe it'll take a while before you find it, but you're not wrong if you go to one parent space and it doesn't fit, it doesn't feel good. That's
Yeah.
okay.
Exactly. Keep looking, right? Keep
Keep looking.
finding, find that space.
And know that you're not the only one.
Yes.
I can't tell you how many parents still feel that way. And that is so isolating and just very disconcerting for parents. And so there just are spaces. And if there isn't in your area, you can create one.
Yes.
So
I was just going to add on, like, exactly to Lisa's earlier point about, and Julie's earlier point of having kids be in these queer spaces. There's the common misconception that, like, being in those spaces will make those kids gay, make those kids queer. what you are actually seeing is exactly what Lisa and Julie have already explained. They're letting down their walls. They're feeling safe enough to fully be themselves. They're not standing rigid as they are, in every other context, terrified that if they reach out, they're going to have their metaphorical hands chopped off.
Right.
It's all about suddenly being able to let loose and just grow and stretch and breathe.
Yeah. That feels so important, I think, especially today in relation to trans kids, because there's a lot of ideas and misinformation floating out there about trans kids, or not floating, being propagated intentionally, that transness is somehow contagious. It's not, right? Gayness is not contagious either. But what we're seeing is as trans people are more visible in society and not visible in ways where we're being beheaded, right? Or, being harmed, but in ways where we're seeing trans joy, trans people being doctors and lawyers and living their best lives and forming families. That's giving trans children a opportunity to see a future that says, oh wait, maybe I can tell people actually who I am. Maybe I can come out and maybe I can invite people into my life, right? That's really what I think trans kids and LGBT kids in general are doing more, is inviting us into their lives earlier and saying, this is actually who I am, and I want you to be a part of my life, and know that when I'm younger, and I can articulate that in a safe way to you because I have seen community and experienced community, right? Either through media representation or in real life. And what a gift. I mean, my goodness. And to be invited into anybody's life in an authentic way, that's a beautiful thing. And I just wish people could see kids coming out, LGBTQ kids in that way.
And parents with trans kids in particular, put them in spaces where they can see trans adults.
Yes. Yeah.
There's not nearly as much visibility of trans and non-binary adults.
Yeah.
What that creates in the child's mind is the inability to imagine a future.
Yes.
And the parent. The
Exactly.
inability to imagine a future. It used to be that there were never images of gay adults. Now we've
Right.
got good images of gay adults, not as many of trans adults. A lot of trans kids have never met a trans person over the age of 25, which
Right.
means that when they think of their future, they just see a black hole like an
Yeah.
elevator shaft. Fill that with just commonplace, yes, here they are paying their taxes, walking their dogs, like shopping in the grocery store.
Yeah.
I think normalizing the fact that this is not just a youth issue, this is a life issue. And
Yes.
seeing just ordinary trans adults doing their thing can be a really, really powerful kind of mini intervention that you can do.
For both trans
For
kids
both
and
the
their
parents
parents,
and-
Yeah.
because I think a lot of parents have that same
Yeah.
what do they have? What's their hope for the future?
Yep.
And that's very important, and we are missing it in society right now.
Yeah.
So
And I think
yeah.
the fact that we keep talking about kind of predators and contagion, one of the downsides of that is that it's sort of given the message to trans and non-binary adults, stay away from kids.
Right.
We don't
Yeah.
trust you around them. And yet that is harming them and it's harming the kids.
Yeah.
Intergenerational contact is the core of any community.
Oh yeah.
And it's a huge part of the LDS faith. Just these connections across the generations. That should not be denied to LGBTQ kids. They deserve, like Julia said, LGBTQ folks are in your ancestors. To sort of say, none of that changes. None of that changes because you're queer or trans.
Yeah.
You just might have to work a little harder to create those connections. But, giving permission to trans adults and trans kids, spend some time hearing one another's stories, so that it's oh yeah, this is just another life journey. But it goes on. It goes on past age 16, 18, 25, and 30.
Exactly. Yeah. That's such an important message. I mean, when I came out as trans, that was the thing that my parents were afraid of. That's where their fear stemmed from. They were like, we don't know what your adulthood looks like. And then when they saw my adulthood 10 years later, being like, oh, you're just who we wanted you to be. Okay. Well, that's great. And we were able to heal our family because of that, right? They were just like, oh, you're exactly the person we wanted you to be. Your gender's different, but everything else, exact same.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, this has been such a wonderful conversation. Thank you for being willing to spend
Yeah.
some time with us and
Yes.
share the knowledge that you're gathering. We're so excited for you. Give a shout out for the next 25 days. You have your Lighthouse cohort. Is that the
Yeah, so the confusion is all because of me. So we started, and actually the whole inspiration of this was, my very dear friend Scout, who Michael knows,
I love Scout.
I'd flown him out to Utah to help me kind of figure out how to kind of get our heads around the Utah problem. And the fact that there isn't as much research on sort of queer and trans experiences in red states as there
Right.
are in blue states. And so there's really different issues going on with us. And I said, we don't have any longitudinal data in Utah. We need it. And he was like, it's kind of like the idea of a lighthouse. When you're in dangerous, uncertain waters, the research and the data is a part of what you then shine out as guidance,
Love
for the
that.
community. And we thought that was just a beautiful idea. And so when we started this longitudinal study, we're like, we're going to call it the Lighthouse Cohort because that's what we're trying, to do. And I still have this little drawing that Scout made, like, like things, and he's like data, and he's like drawing these ships around it. Now we need to do this at a national level, and it really is the same objective of following people over time, both the queer and trans folks and their family members, in order to be able to provide guidance as to what to do next. And so I said to someone, I'm like, Scout, that's the lighthouse. It's the whole thing, the whole tamale. And nobody else is tracking this. And we're going to need to, no matter how bad things get or don't get, we're going to want to know where we're at now.
Yeah.
So with no funding and no time and no anything, we're like, okay, we've got to find out. We've got to take the heartbeat of our community and the family members in as many states as possible to simply be able to track what happens to us, what happens to the moms, what happens to the siblings, what happens to trans people in Florida versus Oklahoma versus Southern California. So what we're trying to do is, for the first time, track the effects of the sort of political, legislative, cultural climate on us in real time, as it's unfolding. So our goal is to, very short survey. So what we're trying to do is to get as many voices into this survey now, and then we will revisit folks in around 6 months. Some of them may have changed states. Some of them, who knows what'll happen. But we're in the before times right now.
okay? And where can people find that?
We have a website and a link. So what I can do is probably send you the link.
the link.
So that
Yeah,
makes
link
sense.
in the description below.
And there's
Yes.
a QR code, and it's very brief. It's basically brief assessments of mental health, of where they're getting their social safety, of how long they've been in their state, what they expect to happen. And we also give folks the option to either sort of write in or record a short video to just describe what their experience is right now in their state, and what gives them strength and hope. We realize that most of us have more capacity for resilience than we know. So one of the things that we ask folks to address is okay, if someone like you wanted to move to your state and they wanted to thrive, what would you tell them? Because when you ask them that, it forces them to look at oh, I guess I'm here. What would I tell them? And that process is really important to us. We don't want this research to leave people with a sense of oh my God, things are terrible. And it's you know what? Humans have been dealing with terrible things since the beginning of time. Yeah. And what we need to do is to look inside, figure out what we need, and then extend that to others. And the process of offering help and offering assistance often makes us feel better in the process. So what we really hope is that even in the process of collecting this data, we sort of push people gently to tap into their own sense of resilience and to connect with the other people that are loving them.
Wow. Such incredible work. Thank you all for doing what you do. It's
Absolutely.
so needed, and gives me a lot of hope.
Yes.
So,
Yes. We really appreciate you taking time to sit down with us and share your knowledge and experience.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you
Absolutely.
too.